So Empedocles and Anaxagoras were born roughly close to 500 BC. They were contemporaries of Alcmaeon, and they began to describe the four elements. Now this is what we begin to see as the way Greek medicine is currently described. Philosophers contemplated composition of matter, first talked about atoms, although his concept of the atom was primitive in comparison to what we know today. And he talked about the seed of the human soul. So Empedocles elaborated the concept that disease is primarily an expression of a disturbance of the perfect harmony of four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. And he formulated a rudimentary theory of evolution. Well, that's followed in the sort of mid-400s BC by Hippocrates. Hippocrates is frequently described as the father of medicine. He was the one who separated medicine and science from philosophy and religion. Prior to that, philosophy had consisted of everything that we might today call thought, including science as well as religion and so on. Hippocrates is the one who basically said, wait a minute, disease is not a punishment by the gods. Disease is something that comes when people lose their health. Health is obtained through diet, drugs, and keeping the body in balance. So, an example would be the way Hippocrates described epilepsy. It appears to me to be no wise more divine nor more sacred than other diseases, but has a natural cause from which it originates like other affections. Men regard its nature and cause as divine from ignorance. So we see the beginning of a sort of new way of thinking, the potential for a scientific review. On the other hand, the way in which these balances were to be maintained were still quite primitive. They were interested in blood and phlegm and black and yellow bile as representing those four humors, and the balance of the humors was essential, and so you can of course balance these things through bloodletting or purging. And this went on for many centuries. So you see how yellow bile represents fire, black bile represents the earth, blood represents air, and phlegm represents water. And these things fit into a relationship that needs to be maintained. Well, the Hippocratic works include diagnosis, epidemics, obstetrics, pediatrics, nutrition, and surgery. And even though these are all attributed to Hippocrates, some of the works may have been written by other authors. But the highest emphasis is placed on the good of the patient. The image you see is a 1526 printing, or reprinting, I guess you would say, of the Hippocratic works. So medicine is of all the arts the most noble, but notwithstanding, owing to the ignorance of those who practice it, and of those who inconsiderately form a judgment of them, it is at present far behind all the other arts. Interesting. So Hippocrates believed that medicine was primitive and was just beginning to be understood, and was plagued by many who practiced in ignorance. And so we see his ultimate contribution, the Hippocratic Oath. I swear by Apollo the physician, and Asclepius, and Hygeia, and Panacea, and all the gods and goddesses, that according to my ability and judgment I will keep this oath and this stipulation. The way we think of it, of course, is his commitment to, above all, do no harm. So Aristotle comes along in about 380 BC, is the son of a physician, was the student of Plato, and used the senses to gain knowledge. This is observation. This is again beginnings of science. And so he wrote about human anatomy and animal anatomy, He had many works in metaphysics and talked about statesmanship and poetry. The painting of Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer is a Rembrandt. And the importance of Aristotle to Western intellectual life, even 2,000 years after his death, is honored by this painting, in which the great philosopher-scientist is acknowledging his debt to Homer. The plague of Athens, sometime between 430-426 BC, major deal, written about by several authors, but Thucydides writes that most of the deaths occurred to people, such as family, friends, and doctors, who were taking care of the ill. While the conception of contagion was not understood at the time, people did become fearful of getting sick and began neglecting to care for the ill and moving out of the cities. We see Dioscorides in the early AD period collecting pharmacological substances and writing books about the preparation, properties, and testing of drugs. And so traveling the Roman and Greek world collecting pharmacological substances was his passion, and he ended up publishing 5 books on these things. And then comes Galen. Galen is born in 131 AD. He has his medical training both in Smyrna and Alexandria. He became a surgeon and physician, and he became an experimental physiologist, and he supported observation and the use of reason in developing his ideas. It turned out that he was a surgeon for gladiators, and he was the physician of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He was one of the very first experimental physicians, and he was researching the function in specific of the kidneys and the spinal cord, and was doing controlled experiments. He would write books that would later influence medicine all the way through the Middle Ages. Now, Artemidorus, another century later, mid-2nd century, he wrote the Onocritica about the interpretation of dreams, and was presumed to be the greatest authority on dream interpretation. This was still an important aspect of the healing notion. Apollo was presumed to be the god of healing, who either brings or relieves plagues, and then Eileithyia would be Hera's daughter. She was specifically focused on childbirth, and then Hygeia was the personification of health. So Asclepius was a physician who was presumed to become a god, and was observed as a god, specialized in healing, and was renowned for healing abilities, and was described so in the Iliad by Homer. So, in the image you see on the left, it's the extraction of Asclepius from the abdomen of his mother, Coronis, by Apollo. So Apollo is birthing Asclepius from the body of the mother, and interestingly enough, it looks like a cesarean section, doesn't it? So, Asclepius is presumed to be the son of the goddess Coronis. He had a mortal father. He was raised by a centaur, Chiron, and Chiron is presumed to have been very powerful in the understanding of herbs and incantations, and even surgery. And Asclepius was eventually killed by Zeus because he was raising people from the dead. Or according to another story, Zeus killed him because he was accepting gold as a bribe for healing people. And however you wish to interpret that, it shows that there was some distrust of physicians and dissatisfaction with having to pay doctors, even as far back as in Greece. So the sons, Podalirius and Machaon, continued his work. Now, the place where medicine was given would be the Asclepia. Asclepius would tell the patients how to treat an ailment, and the priest would create a treatment plan, and the relative might actually serve as a stand-in patient if necessary. So it would happen in a dream. The god Asclepius would tell the patient what to do, and would be essentially allowed to sleep. So here is the Asclepion of Pergamon. This is in today's Turkey. And you see a variety of the features and functions of it. There is an area for plays and dramas to be held, for poetry to be read. There is a large courtyard for strolling and so forth. The lower right, the sort of circular piece with the apses off of the circle, it's coded number 11 there, is the therapy building in which people were allowed to go to sleep and would have their dreams, which would then later be interpreted. So the temple would be in the same space, sacred courtyards, a variety of places in which people could enjoy the good life. They ate well, they slept, they were relaxed, they were exposed to poetry, drama, and the arts, and to exercise and so forth. And this is where one would have been treated. This is an artist's conception of what it might have looked like. You see the image on the extreme right is the area in where the dreams were held, and then adjacent to it a temple that has an honor for the god Asclepion. And the far side, diagonally opposite, you see the amphitheater where things could be done in the way of drama and so forth. So we have the Hall of the Dreamers, we have features such as latrines and bathtubs and mud baths and other sorts of spa-like treatments that could occur in this kind of a place. Unconventional treatments were against the practice of the time. Unconventional medicine might be prescribed by a dream. In the 2nd century A.D., a man suffering from a groin tumor was sent on a long horseback ride because that was what Asclepius told him to do. But basically, patient beds, medications, bath, diet, exercise, and so on were how one was cared for in these sorts of environments. We would think of it as less than seriously interventional. We're not talking about surgery. We're not talking about those kinds of things. We're talking about more of a holistic psychological intervention in a variety of ways for those treatments. Now here you see some of the specific details of the kind of Asclepia buildings, the latrines on the left, and the way in which water and air might have been moved around. Conventional Greek buildings, much in the same style as one have found in the Agora or other public buildings of their time, and yet important enough in order to respect the god Asclepion to have been built of marble and other fine materials, and to have sufficient number of priests in order to interpret the dreams and to care for individuals in that way. And what we're going to see next is the way in which the Romans adopt these types of physician practices and medical understanding from Greece as the Romans eventually conquer the same areas that the Greeks had controlled previously. And the Romans, rather than developing their own totally independent and separate type of medicine, will essentially adopt Greek medicine almost exactly as it existed during Greek times.